time now for business. We say hello to Kate Moody.
Hi, Francois.
War is over.
Well,
I'm talking about trade
war,
trade truce.
And it's only, it's better to say that it's a truce. I think it's only for 4 months for now. Hostilities could break out at any time as we go ahead. But we're talking about the Airbus-Boeing subsidy case, which has seen transatlantic tariffs imposed in both directions. The U.S. has now temporarily lifted levies on certain imports from the U.K. London already did so in January, post-Brexit. It opens the door to a similar easing of tensions between Washington and the European Union. Tariffs remain in place on billions of euros worth of goods, but French President Emmanuel Macron, among others, has said he's ready to negotiate a deal. Luke Trego reports.
A 4-month suspension to trade tariffs between the United States and the United Kingdom in an effort to de-escalate a 16-year ongoing spat over unfair state subsidies to aircraft giants Airbus and Boeing.
This will allow time to focus on negotiating a balanced settlement to the disputes. It will benefit a wide range of industries on both sides of the Atlantic and allow for focused settlement negotiations to ensure that our aerospace industries can finally see a resolution and focus on COVID recovery and other shared goals.
The move from Washington came after London unilaterally dropped its own tariffs in January, diverging from the European Union's line on the matter following its departure from the bloc. Donald Trump imposed levies on 6.2 billion euros of European goods in 2019 as the EU retaliated, sparking fears of a trade war and fierce criticism from the sector's hit, particularly including Scotch whisky and other US-bound exports. Before the tariffs went into effect, the US market for Scotch had been valued at over 1.2 billion euros. By the end of 2020, it had fallen by nearly a third. While both Airbus and Boeing welcomed the development and what each referred to as a move necessary to create a level playing field, there'll need to be further progress in the months ahead, with Washington reserving the right to reimpose tariffs at any point. The EU, in the meantime, still remains at loggerheads with the US, with levies still in place on both sides.
Well, separately, Airbus has said it will avoid forced layoffs in France, Germany, and the UK. In the midst of the pandemic last year, the European aviation giant said it was planning to cut 15,000 jobs worldwide. The food delivery platform Deliveroo has announced plans to list its shares in London. It's welcome news for the UK as the British finance industry adapts to the post-Brexit era. Deliveroo is valued at around 5.8 billion euros. Amazon bought a stake in it last year, and it sets the stage for one of the most highly anticipated initial public offerings of the year so far. Let's check in on the day's trading action now. A relatively muted session for the major European indices. We saw slight gains in Paris and Milan, losses in London and Frankfurt. New data showed a nearly 6% drop in retail spending in the Eurozone in the month of January. Choppy trade on Wall Street as stocks seek to end their 2-day losing streak, but the Nasdaq has taken a sharp turn downwards, down over 1%. The Dow Jones and S&P 500 also below the flat line. This as the Federal Reserve Chief Jerome Powell said that taking steps towards reopening the economy would likely lead to a temporary jump in inflation. Meanwhile, oil prices have jumped around 5% as OPEC and its allies suggested they'll be keeping their production curbs in place for the foreseeable future. We'll have more on that announcement in the next bulletin. The number of Americans claiming unemployment benefits rose slightly last week. The Labor Department reported 745,000 new applications compared to a revised 736,000 the previous week. It's been nearly a year since the pandemic sparked an all-time high of nearly 7 million claims in a single week. But the weekly figures remain elevated by historical standards, a sign of the ongoing weakness of the U.S. labor market. Economists expect modest job gains to be reported in the February employment data when that's released on Friday. Representatives of Doctors Without Borders staged a protest outside the World Trade Organization today, calling on pharmaceutical companies to share their coronavirus vaccines. India and South Africa have been pushing for drug giants to waive their patents, and the WTO is to host talks on that proposal next week. A few producers have joined forces with the likes of Sanofi and Merck beginning to produce vaccines that have been developed by Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, respectively. But activists say the WTO should open the way for intellectual property protections to be waived in this case, accusing the pharma industry of focusing on profits rather than saving lives. Take a listen.
If we had the waiver, we'd be able, in a number of countries, to scale up production right now, which would allow for the diagnostics, the medicines, and the vaccines to get where they're needed most. Right now, we're seeing just a trickle of vaccines making it to the global south, and this is just not acceptable in today's world.
A really sensitive, but also a really timely issue to be discussing.
Yeah, indeed. And that issue before the WTO is going to be coming back again and again. Many thanks, Kate Moody. We'll have more business news for you later on.